Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today we got a teaser image of the next elite specialization that they're going to talk about, and it is the Necromancer. So here we see a very badass looking Asuran Necro, and they are of course rocking the Greatsword. Greatsword is the weapon this specialization will get. We already knew this, so this image isn't as much a reveal as, for example, the Guardian was, where really it was only very strong but speculation that they'd be getting a longbow. So really we just get to muddle at the art and wonder whether we'll be getting this sword as a default weapon or whether it's showing a legendary. But knowing we have got the Necromancer coming up, I thought I'd talk a little bit about it to you guys, what we could potentially be seeing, and I think there are some very interesting ideas out there. I will also specify before we go into this, 10-ton Hammer, unless they're wrong, said that actually ArenaNet are going to reveal the first 3 elite specializations, so this will be the 3rd. Then we may be going on break for more elite specializations and then returning to them later. Again, that may not be exactly what ends up happening, but apparently word is out that that may be what ArenaNet's doing, so let's really settle down and see what we can think of for the Necromancer. So remember, elite specialization is going to get a weapon, so we're looking at 5 greatsword skills, going to get a full new set of utilities, and probably some change to their F ability, which for the Necromancer is Death Shroud. Obviously the name is going to be very important to people. John Peters actually came out with a quote about how they named the Dragon Hunter, considering, you know, a lot of people didn't really like the name. I thought I'd read that to you guys and maybe we can draw on something for this for the Necromancer. And he said, a couple of notes on the Dragon Hunter. We went with this name because we felt it was evocative of the medieval witch hunters. Guardians consider themselves protectors of the innocent, followers of their faith, be it in honor, valor, etc. The origin of the Dragon Hunter is more subtle, nuanced version of this. Guardians fight for justice, and the Dragon Hunter faction believes that justice is the eradication of dragons and their minions. I understand this is a lot more high concept than the Mesmer name, Chronomancer, but at the end of the day, we felt like we wanted to try and push a more mature theme here. He says, I hope this helps explain our thinking. We had other generic names in mind, but felt like it was important, and here's the bit we want to look at, to have a mix of specialization names that are generic fantasy, more Tyrian fantasy, and more high concept. This one falls more into the 3rd category. So, Tyrian fantasy, are they considering Chronomancer Tyrian fantasy? Not necessarily so much. So, there are a lot of necro specialization names being thrown around, but we could actually find something much more specific to Tyria at some point. I don't really have any examples of that for the necro, but do bear that in mind. One of the most popular names people are thinking of for this specialization is Reaper. Reaper is obviously just a very badass sounding name. It's also, once again, something, though, that appears in the PvP title tracks. This time, unlike with like Paragon and Guardian, it's not actually the Necromancer specific track, which is Phantom. This is just the name of a title you get through the generic PvP track, which eventually rolls into Reaper. So maybe a bit more likely than the others. There is also the Banchi, which I'll be talking quite a lot about in this video. There's the idea of demonologist, harbinger, cultist. Cultist stuff has always been a big part of the Necromancer theme, and I think the name is quite suited. People saying stuff like Lich, and of course many other dark-sounding names. My personal favourite of the list is the Banchi, and this is because of a key mechanic I believe the Necromancers may be getting, which is the idea of orders. So, just as we did with the Paragon idea, actually we can look back at Guild Wars 1 Necromancer stuff and see something Guild Wars 1 Necros had that Guild Wars 2 Necros do not. These are order skills. You guys should be seeing some examples of them on the screen right now. One thing that the Guild Wars 1 Necromancer did a lot more of compared to the Guild Wars 2 Necromancer was they damaged themselves to inflict damage on enemies. They sacrificed their life and quite often large chunks of their health to provide bonus effects to themselves and allies. There is a tiny little bit of this remaining in Guild Wars 2. You've got corruption skills that put very weak condis most of the time on the Necromancer, and they can quickly cleanse and then transfer off. But really that kind of gameplay hasn't seen much use or been stressed at all in Guild Wars 2, just this tiny idea with the corruption skills. Well, Guild Wars 1, it was much more prevalent, and one particular type of skill they had were orders. Orders cost the Necromancer a lot of health to cast. They sacrificed much for them, but orders would buff them and all their allies with powerful effects that would help people do a lot more damage. This is incredibly likely to be a thing in Guild Wars 2 and for this specialization, and there are 2 big reasons for that. Number one is I think ArenaNet do still like the idea of this sacrificial gameplay and recognize that it's been such a weak element of the Necromancer in Guild Wars 2. And also, Necromancer has always been weak in PvE specifically because it doesn't offer much in the way of group support to, you know, buff everyone. They're very selfish characters, and this has always held them back. This, along with their, you know, at times difficult ability to cleave stuff, you know, now that the dagger auto's got cleave on too, it improves it slightly, but not too much, and their mobility have always really held them back. Actually, in one of the trailers, I believe it was in one of the World vs. World clips, remember how we saw the Guardian, or as we now know, a Dragon Hunter, wielding a longbow in a trailer? Actually, there did appear to be some kind of necro skill effect we've seen a while ago that seems to address this mobility issue too. It's some kind of a big blood explosion teleport. I'll run a GIF on the screen for you guys here just so that you can see. So it seems like this specialization will get some kind of explosive blood-looking teleport ability, and maybe this is me reaching, but the idea of the animation there and the blood again makes me think a little bit of sacrificial stuff. So the idea of cleave may be being resolved with the fact we're getting a greatsword, which is classically a cleaving weapon, only the Mesmer doesn't really enjoy this on its greatsword auto attack. And we could be getting stuff from mobility. Well, what about team supports? Well, orders. The question is, how do they implement them? Well, one really interesting idea is actually that the class of utility skills this specialization may get could be spirits. Spirits are a little bit like enchantments in that each has its own special effect and with its own icon and its own specific thing players have to learn. So if you think about like the Frost Spirit, it's actually, it's not an existing boon, it's something that exists outside. So the idea of necromancers getting spirits does work on various levels. Spirits, again, are kind of undead summony things, which is a big theme of the necromancer. And functionally, you could get like spirit orders, and it's the spirits that take damage whenever they proc on the orders, and it's like they're sacrificing health. So I see it a little bit. I'm not too keen on the idea. I'm particularly not keen on the idea, even though thematically it kind of fits, that we already have a class that has tons of like AI associated with it, and then you're just going to dump a bunch more in there. And yes, you won't be able to run it all at once, but it's still an awful lot of utility slots and things that's just basically saying, hey, you get like more pets on the necro, and I just don't think that they would do that. There's also a bit of an overlap there with the idea of a necromancer that summons spirits is kind of going into ritualist territory a little, right? And isn't the Revenant really the successor to the ritualist we've kind of been seeing? So, I don't know, there's a bit of overlap. I don't think it works perfectly, so I doubt this. While we're on the topic of ritualist style stuff, some people have been saying spirit weapons could be a thing coming to the necromancer. Now remember, Guild Wars 2 spirit weapons are kind of like the guardian things that they summon, and again, it suffers from the same problems as spirits that I just mentioned a moment ago, but GW1 spirit weapons actually infused ancient legends and ancestors into weapons, and then gave them bonus effects as they struck, which is a little bit-ish like Order gameplay. And think about the story too. If we are considering Bram is going to become a dragon hunter because maybe Air's going to die and he's going to pick up a bow or something in the Pact Destruction, if we're going along that and we say that that influenced an elite specialization, well, look at Marjorie. Like, we know Marjorie has been wielding a greatsword, and the greatsword is imbued with her sister's soul. So we're going to see some kind of gameplay here where you can imbue your weapon with various spirit souls. And again, that's a nice idea, the idea of spirit weapons, but again, that's kind of Revenant territory, isn't it? The idea of channeling past legends, like, so again, I'm not totally convinced that it could be a part of its mechanics, and something definitely to bear in mind. Even one of the even crazier things I thought of on this idea was the idea of them getting conjures. You know, currently elementalists get conjure weapons. What if we had necromancers with them? But let's not go too wild with it. No, the most likely thing I think we will see are shouts. Shouts coming to the Necro Elite Specialization, and if you are in a position where you have shouts on the Necro, doesn't Banchi fit as a really good name? This is why it's my favorite theory about what exactly we could be getting here. And the idea is that these shouts would be orders. So in the first game, the key thing about orders was they had no cooldown. You could spam the hell out of these abilities, and every single time you cast it, it would buff everyone around you to, for example, with Order of Pain, make them do more flat damage. The trade-off to the fact it had no cooldown, though, was every time you used the order, it sacrificed a ton of your health, so you got blows. So that was your limiting factor. Like, you would kill yourself if you used it too many times in a row, and it would sacrifice like 17% of your health each time. So the theory here would be we get a bunch of shouts. These shouts would have no cooldown on them whatsoever, just like the Guild Wars 1 orders. There'd be instant activation abilities that pulse out some buff to allies around you, but to use them, you take a bunch of damage. There are some other versions of this too. World of Enders was actually talking to me on Twitter earlier about the idea of not shouts but stances. He likes the idea of having like a katana wielding, because obviously Marjorie's weapon, greatsword necro, that uses stances, and the idea is that these are painful stances you toggle yourself into, and you get like massive health degeneration from being in these stances. But I'm just not sure it works so well. I prefer the idea of shouts. I think shouts have more flavor to them as skills anyway. Think about it. If we're getting shouts on a new class, on the Necromancer, that's a whole bunch more voiceovers and stuff we get. And if these are like painful shouts to use, they can be various wails and screams, just fitting in with the Banchi concept. So this would be the idea. We're going to get 6 shout abilities that somehow have a sacrifice to us. There are complications again, though. What about the heal skill? If they're kind of sacrificey things, that doesn't really work. Well, maybe the heal is still going to be a shout, it just won't be an order for itself, would be some kind of reasonable solution there. The idea of an instant activation heal, that is AoE, a shout heal we haven't actually seen in the game yet. So again, that could be kind of a curious take on things. One idea as well would be that the heal heals you and your allies, but it heals your allies for more if you sacrifice life force rather than your health. It's very easy to imagine what the orders themselves could be as well. For example, the first game had Order of Pain. I think if we see orders, we're going to see Order of Pain come back. This would flat buff the damage your allies around you are doing, very similar to how Frost Spirit works right now. We also, though, in the previous game had Order of Apostasy. Now, this was an elite, and this would strip enchantments from foes that your allies were attacking. Incredibly powerful. And this would actually, instead of sacrificing to cast, this would damage you every time that effect procced on something. Incredibly powerful in the first game. This could be, Order of Apostasy in the second game. Doesn't necessarily need to retain its elite status, as long as, the sacrifice was high enough, but it could be boon strip, so as you attack, just stripping boons, or you have a fairly high chance, I should say, at least, because I'm not very keen on super RNG gameplay, but the idea of being able to actually boon strip, and again, this would be very, very powerful. Then you could have a couple of other orders. You could have an order that applies various conditions on strike. So both Torment and Bleed are pretty big necro ideas, so it'd be like an order that applies, these conditions. And again, because of the stack removal, these skills may actually see viability. There was Order of the Vampire from the first game, could return here in this game. This would be not just flat damage, but this would actually enable you and your allies to steal life on hit. In fact, this could perhaps be the heal. But then think about the fact we already have a heal that's very similar to that, the Signet heal that they added a while ago, so I think that's unlikely. Even some really powerful ones. What if we had an elite order that was like, you knock down on hit, but whenever it procs, it does big damage to you, and you might want to turn it off quickly. The final order we saw in the first game was Order of Undeath, and this buffed the strength of your minions around you. I think this is unlikely, because if you want to play a minion build, you want to stack up on minions rather than also dedicate one of these skills. You're going to want your Flesh Golem, really, instead of this other elite. But it's an idea that maybe could be rolling around there. So yeah, this would be the idea. Shouts, incredibly short duration, high sacrificial cost. And again, think about with sacrificing the necro primary mechanic, and this is life force, and this is death shroud, so it doesn't actually have to be damaging your health directly. There could be instead more ways to spend life force, as the spending of life force isn't something we see enough of really on the Necromancer, and because it kind of functions as a second health bar, it still kind of works with that sacrificial angle. And I think this may even be more likely than just chunking our own health down itself, so it could be affecting either or both. It could be if you have if you have life force available, then it will take life force from you. But if you run out of life force, then it will start actually damaging your health. That would be really kind of a cool way for them to have done those skills also. So those are the various classes of skills. That's why I think orders could be a really big thing. Of course, that's not going to be everything. We will get a whole bunch of greatsword skills. Who knows? Maybe the orders are even going to be loaded on the greatsword rather than the utilities, and the utilities are going to be something totally different, like mantras or any other beneficial effects you can imagine. And then, lastly, we have the idea of Death Shroud itself. I very much like the idea of Death Shroud changing. The same idea, though, that you can toggle into it with F1, that you can trait for it to make it auto burn will still probably be a thing, that it will still exist with that Grandmaster that exists in another Necromancer specialization, which means it will automatically toggle on when you get on low health. This kind of suggests, by the way, that all Necromancer elite specializations to come ever, because of that Grandmaster, will all have some kind of very similar Death Shroud style thing. But I like the idea of maybe changing the Death Shroud skills. That's maybe not too different, however, to just adding like an F2 and you have an alternate Death Shroud you can toggle into. And again, I'm not too much of a fan of those ideas. Or even another further one, it would feel much more like a straight upgrade, I suppose. But you go into Death Shroud and maybe you unlock the right-hand side of your skill bar while you're in Death Shroud. And you get those 5 utilities. Maybe you get some kind of a second elite you can equip in Death Shroud. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff they could do. But that's my favourite concept for what we've got coming up. Absolutely, it is just wild speculation on my part. But that's my predictions there. That's what I think we may be seeing. It would fill in everything that Necromancer is currently deficient in, and give us some cool new gameplay as well to boot. Let me know what you guys think. There's a lot of ideas for this specialization. I'm very curious to hear them. And in a few days, hopefully we'll get the reveal. Thanks for watching, guys, and I guess I'll see you next time.